Welcome back for episode number 4 of this series, the final one until I come back for quarter check-ins and at the end of the year to evaluate how things have gone. So this series has been all about planning a more sustainable and ambitious 2022. And if you're here joining me, you likely accepted my invitation to join me for this 4-week series to do this planning for more sustainable ambition in this new year. And I appreciate you being here. The goal was to build your Life+Work Resilience Rx or prescription and to create a plan, practice, and progress over time. And as I shared in the first episode of the series, sustainable ambition is aspirational. It asks us to hold two opposing ideas, sustain and stretch, at the same time. How can we sustain ourselves? That's the sustainable part, while stretching ourselves, the ambition part. And what that implies is it is a practice and one that calls for perspective, personalization, pacing, and patience. And that's also why we're talking about creating a plan and then practicing and progressing over time. And that's where this week's episode on quarterly planning comes in and gets us into action. So if you want to hear more about the background of the series overall, I'll again point you to episode number 42, the first in the series. And I won't go through all the background again here for those who have been along for the journey. But if you're dropping in now, you may want to go back and start there to get grounded. And then a final reminder, I know I've shared this each time, but that this series has coincided with the launch of the Sustainable Ambition 12-month workbook plus planner, your Life+Work Resilience Rx. And if you are interested in learning more about the planner, you can find information at sustainableambition.com/planner2022. But you don't need to get the planner if you're not interested. Totally fine. What we do together and what we've been doing for the last 4 weeks, you can do without having the planner in hand. You can follow along on the podcast here and just take notes using your own notebook or journal or a Google or Word doc to document your planning as you go along. So hopefully you've already been doing that and you have a place where you've been keeping these notes, whatever's been working best for you. And you can continue to take notes where it best suits you. And I should have been saying all along, if people haven't picked up on this, such as planning, I often, like myself, I listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm out for walks or running, and I often stop to take notes if it calls for that. And so I often do encourage people to, for some of these solo episodes where I'm offering you questions and prompts and inquiries, to consider doing it while you are out in nature or out for a walk somewhere. And to take advantage of that kind of spaciousness and that time when often our minds do wander, and you might take a prompt and pause the podcast and kind of, think about what your response might be and capture it just in a notes app or something like that. I recognize that this series is a bit more in depth. And so you may do it that way. Again, maybe you actually take a walk and you find a nice place to sit and you take notes while you're listening. But you also may choose to listen to this sitting in one spot and having your notebook or your computer with you and kind of going through the prompts in a position where you can actually take more detailed notes or notes in a way that you can reference back to. So again, whatever works best for you. So before we get into today's material, which will have you do some planning for this quarter of the year, this first quarter, let's review what we've done so far. So in episode number 1 of the series, in week 1, we set your ambitions for 2022. And then in week 2, you defined your sustainable, your Life+Work Resilience prescription. What will keep you operating at your best? And as part of that, we also made a commitment. What was our commitment for this year? And what do you want to make happen around really building more sustainable ambition for yourself? And then week 3, we pulled out our 12-month calendars and maybe our 18-month calendars and started to plan ahead to make sure we are putting things on our calendar that will support us in reaching our ambitions and doing so sustainably. Now, in this episode, we're focused on planning Q1, what I call Q1. Maybe that's a business term that I'm just used to. So the first quarter of the year, thinking about the first 3 months of the year. And I'll start this final episode in the series with a quote from Mark Twain. You know that I like quotes if you haven't picked up on that already. And I've been using quotes kind of to help frame what we've been doing. And this one, Mark Twain said, "The secret of getting ahead is getting started." So it's the start of the year. It's the start of this practice, and we need to start somewhere. And as I said earlier, sustainable ambition is a practice. So in terms of creating sustainable ambition and building life+work resilience, it takes awareness and it takes a bit of discipline, and that becomes a part of the practice. So that's partly, I think, what you're going to start to build into a quarterly plan as we move forward. And with this quarterly plan, it's really time to aim and then start to get into action. So we're going to plan the quarter. You're going to do some, as you get into action, some practicing with some things, and then you can track your progress. And then at the end of each month and then quarter, really assess what's working and not working for you and determine how you'll adapt. So it's really about this cycle of aiming, acting, assessing, and adapting on a monthly and quarterly basis. So, you're aiming and you're planning, you're going to act and take action on some things that are going to be definitive around likely your ambitions, and some things also around sustaining yourself. But there are going to be some things that we want to practice too. Like, hey, I don't know if this habit is going to work for me, or I think this type of sustaining activity is going to work for me, but I'm not sure. So let me try it out. And so there's going to be that element of practicing as well. And then as you assess and adapt, that's what's going to help us make progress over time and to progress. You can say progress in different ways, obviously, as I'm just doing and demonstrating there. But it's all about how do we kind of find what works for us to keep us operating at our best throughout the year, and really in a way that helps support us in achieving our ambitions, right? While also keeping things sustainable. So as we start to get into things here, I'm going to have you look back, right? Look back to all the work that you did in this first 3 weeks. And we're going to start first by creating a quarter plan, and then also acknowledging your quarter RX or prescription. And again, we're going to determine where you want to aim for the quarter and the activities that will stretch you and those that will sustain you over the 3 months. And then, as I said, it's also important here to get clear on some actions or behaviors you might want to try and practice. And then if you want, you can also break that down, and I'll just give you a few prompts for this, into a monthly plan, if that's going to help you. If you'd like to keep it at the quarterly and then kind of more casually on your own plan on the monthly level, that's great. And then what's going to be important also is to put on your calendar to do a month and quarter review to support you, as I'm noting here, in this practice and supporting your learning journey and that progressing and assessing and adapting over time. It really does take a purposeful pause to ask what worked, what didn't, what's next for me. So I'd encourage you to even pause now and put an appointment on your calendar to check in at the end of each month and then at the end of the quarter to reflect and assess so you can adapt accordingly. So as I mentioned just a little bit earlier, like the other episodes, it's going to be helpful to carve out a little bit of time for this and determine where you want to capture your notes. Plan to pause as you go through these prompts as necessary based on what works for you. Okay, so as we get into the prompts, there's going to be a few different things I'm going to have you take a look at. And the first is, what's your aim for the quarter? And then we're going to also talk about, as I mentioned earlier, what's your aim for each month, if you'd like to break it down that way. And then I'll give you a few thoughts on doing monthly reviews. And then also just note that I offer a weekly and daily check-in if that's something that you'd like. And that's where we'll kind of wrap things up in this particular episode and leave the quarter review for a later episode when I'll come back and take you all through that. So let's start first with what's your aim for the quarter. And the first place to start is with your ambitions. So what I'd suggest is that you first look back to what you documented after the first podcast episode. What are your ambitions for the year? And how do you want to stretch yourself, or what are you striving for? And I'd have you think about, what do you need to act on this quarter given your ambitions? And I'd importantly also point you towards what will success this quarter look like, both personally and professionally. And my suggestion here is to, keep this at a little bit of a higher level. You've done the work up front. So just, note a few things for yourself. And that comes into this next prompt where what's really your focus for the quarter? So if you were to narrow it down, what are your top 3 priorities across your personal and professional life? And you could have 3 for each, or you may find that you only have 1 to 2 for each. And consider this as, again, you look back to what you articulated overall for the year in terms of your ambitions and also your priorities. And then also when you think about what's your focus for the quarter, I'd suggest you look back to the work we did in episode number 3 of the series on your calendar and consider what from your calendar is important to note that you want to just remind yourself of now as you think about this first quarter of the year. What will require your attention this quarter? What are just some calendar notes that, again, as you're planning this first quarter, you want to make note of here? Okay, so that's looking at your ambitions. Now, importantly, as you think about your aim for the quarter, as we've talked about this whole time, what I think is good and helpful and unique about this approach is to think about, okay, well, what are my ambitions? But now, what is my aim for this quarter as it relates to your sustainable? So how will you sustain yourself this quarter given your ambitions? And so I encourage you to review your Life+Work Resilience Rx from podcast episode number 2 of this series. And given what you're trying to achieve and how you'll stretch yourself this quarter, what do you want to make present for yourself this quarter around your prescription to aim your quarter in the right direction to make it more sustainable? So consider how you want to support yourself to really show up as your best this quarter. And, this might include, again, those value activities. There's different elements that you might want to consider here. It might be a busy quarter for you. So you might want to think about what are going to be the most reasonable and, things that you can bring into your routine to really support your sustaining yourself. Think about the structures and the support you might need. So go back to your prescription and think about my treatment, take with, and refill, which are those value activities, those energizing activities, sustaining activities, and pauses and breaks. And then review your contraindications and extra strength, like what are the boundaries you need to set, or what are the structures and support you need to put in place. And then, as I've been alluding to, think about, is there something here that you want to try and practice, that you want to take a chance to see how it might work for you in terms of sustaining yourself and making this time and life plus work more sustainable. So importantly, in your aim, what I'm talking about here is really thinking about both your ambitions and how you're going to make it sustainable. So then the third step is to think about, well, what's your aim for each month? And again, if you want to keep it at the quarter level, that's fine too. And I'd kind of keep this, if you do choose to do it at the month level, you might want to do it month by month instead of, kind of outlining each one right now. But I think about, based on your quarter plan and quarter RX, now break it down to the important activities and actions for each month in the quarter. And then make note of anything important on your calendar and what you expect your pace to be as well, to plan accordingly. So again, you might just think about some of your prioritized actions and activities on each month, any notes for your calendar, kind of being aware of your pace, and just making any other notes that you think are important to capture as you think about each month. So that's the aim part, to just, okay, let me think about this quarter. Let me think about what I've thought about in terms of my ambitions for the overall year, sustaining myself on the overall year, my calendar for the overall year, and let me now bring it down to the quarter and what this looks like, and then bring it down to the month, if that's helpful for you. And then, as I said, I'd encourage you to really do a monthly check-in and a monthly review to see how's it going for you. And I just encourage you to do check in regularly and kind of say, how are you doing against your aims for the quarter, both for your stretch and your sustaining activities? And ask, like, what am I learning? What's working? What's not working? And capture notes around that and use that as your assessment, and then adjust anything as you might need. And then, as I mentioned, if it's helpful for you, and this might be enough, I do tend to be thorough with things that I offer and provide. And so the other thing that I want to offer, but I'm not going to go through right now today, but I'll just let you know, I also offer some weekly and daily check-in prompts to help you stay on track. So these are just meant to be like quick, they're 5 questions each for the week, for each day, if you want to use it to help kind of just center you and keep you aligned to your ambitions and to keeping things more sustainable for yourself. And so I will capture the link to, if you'd like to get a printout of those weekly and daily check-in prompts, I will offer that to you, and I will capture that in the show notes. And it's a downloadable version, so you can print it out if you'd like to reference it and use it. So I will capture that link in the show notes for you. And that's it for this. So I'm going to hold on the quarter review and prompts until we get together at the end of March and do our quarter review. So as you start to act, remember that sustainable ambition is a practice, as I said, that calls for perspective. It calls for personalization. It calls for pacing and patience. And this isn't easy. I'm practicing this with you as well, and I'm learning along the way. And, really I'm aiming and acting and assessing and adapting along the way, just along with all of you. And so it really does take learning about ourselves and being in this practice of planning and learning and progressing over time. But I am finding this work to help me, and I am finding more sustainable ambition, even though it isn't easy, because I like to stretch myself, right? As I said, and yet I am learning. What do I need to do to sustain myself as well? So that is the end of this 4-week series. So we, again, set out to set our ambitions for 2022. We defined your sustainable, your Life+Work Resilience Rx, what is going to keep you operating at your best. We looked at our client calendars and planned ahead. And then what we did today is planned your quarter and really looking at both how you're going to stretch yourself and sustain yourself. The other thing we did is we pulled back out the work we did in those first few weeks, right? And really to say, like, what do I want to focus on for this first quarter in January, February, March? And I know January is about over now, so let's look ahead to the next 2 months, but acknowledge what you've done in this past month. But, how do you want to look ahead and what's next for the next 2 months of February and March? And I'd encourage you to also think about really one of the prompts that's really been helping me as well of late in helping me put things into my life and on my calendar that really both support me in my ambitions, but importantly with sustaining myself is really to think about how do I want to feel and what are the experiences and actions I want to take to help me feel that. And then I'd also encourage you to think about, essentially this work is, I'm saying, what will we do or how will I be even that relates to our ambition plus our sustain kind of list, if you will, that we came up with to keep us aligned with our intentions for the year. It comes back to that commitment that we made to ourselves and what we want this year to feel like and look like and how we really want to be aligned with our sustainable ambition. So what's next from here? Again, I will just say I encourage you to check in each month, put an appointment on your calendar now, and assess what's working, what's not working, and is there anything you'd like to adapt. And then if you'd like, use the weekly and daily check-ins as well. Again, check the link in the show notes. And remember, I'll come back at each quarter end for a check-in, and then at the end of the year to do a show on looking back at the year and conducting a 12-month review to see what you learned, what worked, what didn't, to build your Life+Work Resilience prescription and make Life+Work more sustainable and fulfilling for you. Thank you again for joining me on this journey. I hope you find it helpful to start to be more intentional and take back control to support yourself in making it all a little bit more sustainable. A reminder that if you want to learn more about the workbook and planner, go to sustainableambition.com/planner2022. And again, this could be work that would be really fun to do with others, to both ideate together, learn from each other, help hold each other accountable. So again, you could use the podcast series to do that and then just get together to share and talk. Or I'm also at the same link offering some planning guides. So if you'd like to go there to sustainableambition.com/planner2022, you can find those there as well. And as my standard close, I've been saying, again, if you have any feedback, please reach out and share. I appreciate feedback and knowing what's working and what's not. You can send me an email at podcast@sustainableambition.com. And as I move forward with the podcast this year, I'd love it if you'd give me input. What would be helpful for you in building a more sustainable Life+Work? What are you wondering about, or what are you challenged by? Could be in terms of keeping your work ambitions alive over time and in helping you experience more fulfillment and ease while being ambitious on your terms. So what are sticking points, or just what are areas that you might want to learn a little bit more about and hear a little bit more about? And I'll guide the podcast based on your input, so let me know. You can send me an email again at podcast@sustainableambition.com. And that could also just be a listener question. If you'd like to pass on a listener question, send it to me at that email address as well, and I'm happy to try and address that in the upcoming weeks. I hope you've had a good start to your year. I know I have. I'll look forward to being with you in upcoming episodes with guests and covering a few topics for which I've had some requests as well. So I'm looking forward to that. And I really hope that everyone continues to stay well. And I look forward to being with you in the coming weeks. Take care. Find more inspiring interviews and get show notes for this episode at sustainableambition.com/podcast. Make sure you don't miss an episode or my insider tips, guides, and tools by signing up for Sustainable Ambition Forum, my twice-monthly newsletter. Sign up at sustainableambition.com/subscribe. Thanks again for joining me. Speak with you next time.